I woke up one Tuesday morning to find a massive concrete foundation being poured on what I knew for certain was my property, and three construction workers who just shrugged when I asked them what the hell they were doing on my land. My name is Lucas Jackson, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook community in Henderson, Nevada for about 8 months. The house was a dream come true, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent backyard that extended further than most properties in the subdivision. I had specifically paid extra for the corner lot because of that additional land. The survey had been clear, the property lines were marked, and I had all my paperwork in order. But here I was, standing in my bathrobe at 7 in the morning, staring at a construction crew building something substantial on the eastern edge of my property. "You need to stop," I said, louder this time. "This is my land." One of the workers, a heavy-set guy with a sunburned neck, pulled out a crumpled paper from his back pocket. "Says here this is HOA property. We got the work order from the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. They want a storage unit built here for community equipment." "I don't care what your paper says. This is my property. I have the deed and the survey to prove it." The guy shrugged again. "Take it up with the HOA, man. We just work here." I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office immediately. A chirpy voice answered on the third ring. "Meadowbrook HOA, this is Brenda speaking. This is Lucas Jackson from 4252 Pinewood Drive. There are construction workers building something on my property right now without my permission. I need someone to explain what is happening." "Oh, Mr. Jackson. Yes, let me pull up your file." I heard typing in the background. "Ah, yes, the community storage unit. That was approved at last month's board meeting." "On my property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You cannot build on my private property without permission. According to our records, that land belongs to the HOA. It is designated as common area. Your records are wrong. I have the property survey that shows that land is mine. I paid for it." "Well, Mr. Jackson, I suggest you attend tomorrow evening's HOA board meeting. It starts at 7 p.m. at the community center. You can discuss this with the board president, Mrs. Patterson." I ended the call and immediately went inside to grab my property documents. The survey was clear as day. The lot extended 60 feet past my back fence line, all the way to the drainage easement. That was my land, and these people were pouring concrete on it. I threw on actual clothes and drove straight to the county recorder's office in downtown Henderson. The clerk there was helpful, pulling up the official plat map and my deed. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The property was mine, legally recorded, properly surveyed, and fully paid for. "Can you print me 3 copies of everything?" I asked. Armed with official documentation, I returned home to find the concrete already setting and the workers starting to frame up walls. It was going to be a substantial structure, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, with what looked like plans for a metal roof. I took photos of everything. The construction, the workers, the equipment, all of it. Then I placed a call to a real estate attorney whose number I found online. His name was Robert Chen, and his receptionist managed to squeeze me in for a consultation that same afternoon. Chen's office was in a strip mall off Sunset Road. He was a thin man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of someone who had seen every kind of property dispute imaginable. I laid out the situation and spread my documents across his desk. He studied them for several minutes, then pulled up the HOA's filed documents on his computer. "This is pretty straightforward, Mr. Jackson. The land is yours. The HOA has no claim to it. Their plat map must be outdated or simply wrong. So what do I do? First, you send them a certified letter demanding they cease construction immediately. I will draft it today. Second, if they refuse, we file for an injunction. But that takes time, and in the meantime, they might finish the building. Can I physically stop them? Chen leaned back in his chair. You could call the police for trespassing. But since there is a legitimate dispute over the property line, even if you are clearly right, the police might just tell you it is a civil matter. The construction crew has paperwork saying they have permission, even though that permission is based on incorrect information. This is insane. HOAs often are, Chen said dryly. Let me draft that cease and desist letter. In the meantime, document everything. Photos, videos, keep a log of what they do and when. We might need it. I left his office feeling frustrated but at least armed with a plan. By the time I got home, the framing was already half done. These guys worked fast. That evening, I stood at my back fence and watched them pack up for the day. The structure was taking shape rapidly. Metal studs formed walls, and I could see they planned to install a roll-up door on one side. The next evening, I walked into the Meadowbrook Community Center with a folder full of documents and a growing sense of anger. The meeting room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members sat. I recognized exactly none of them. Sitting in the center was a woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair cut in that aggressive style that somehow communicated. I want to speak to your manager without words. She wore a teal blazer and had a nameplate in front of her that read, Sharon Patterson, President. I took a seat in the 3rd row and waited through 20 minutes of tedious discussion about pool maintenance and a proposed ban on certain mailbox colors. Finally, they opened the floor to homeowner concerns. I stood up. Lucas Jackson, 4252 Pinewood Drive. The HOA is currently constructing a building on my private property without permission. I need this to stop immediately. Sharon Patterson looked at me with the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. Mr. Jackson, we have been over this. That land is HOA common area, designated for community use. I have the property survey and deed right here that prove otherwise. I held up the folder. Our records clearly show your records are wrong. I walked up to the table and set down the documents. This is the official survey from when I purchased the property 8 months ago. This is the recorded deed from the county. This is the plat map from the county recorder's office that I obtained yesterday. All of it shows that land belongs to me. Sharon barely glanced at the papers. We have had this land designated as HOA property for 15 years. Just because you have some papers does not change that. These are legal documents from the county. They absolutely do change that. Another board member, an older man with gray hair, picked up the survey and actually looked at it. Sharon, this does look official. Gerald, we have been planning this storage unit for 2 years. We approved the budget. The construction is nearly complete. On my property, I said, my voice rising, without my permission. If you have a problem with it, Mr. Jackson, you are welcome to hire a lawyer. Sharon's smile was condescending now. But I assure you, the HOA has legal counsel and we stand by our property records. This meeting is adjourned. She actually banged a little gavel. I stood there, stunned by the casual dismissal. Several homeowners filed out, some giving me sympathetic looks. The board members gathered their papers, ignoring me completely. Outside in the parking lot, the older man who had actually looked at my documents approached me. Mr. Jackson, I am Gerald Finch. I am on the board, but I was outvoted on this storage unit project from the start. So you believe me? I believe your documents look legitimate, and I think Sharon is being unreasonably stubborn. But she runs this board with an iron fist. The other 3 members vote however she tells them to. What do I do? Gerald sighed. Get a lawyer. A good one, and document everything. Sharon does not like being told she is wrong, and she will make this difficult. The construction continued the next day and the day after that. By the end of the week, the storage unit was complete. It was a large metal building with a concrete floor, proper walls, and a functioning roll-up door. They had even run electricity to it. On Friday afternoon, a moving truck arrived. I watched from my kitchen window as two men began loading items into the storage unit. Lawn mowers, edging equipment, pool cleaning supplies, folding tables, chairs, and boxes upon boxes of what looked like seasonal decorations. Sharon Patterson herself showed up to supervise, clipboard in hand, directing the workers with sharp gestures. I received the certified letter that Robert Chen had drafted. It had been sent to the HOA 3 days ago. Clearly, they were ignoring it. I called Chen. They finished the building and they are loading it with HOA property right now. We can file for the injunction on Monday, but I am going to be honest with you, Mr. Jackson. Even with your ironclad documentation, these things take weeks to get a court date. You are looking at a month minimum before a judge orders them to remove it. And in the meantime, they get to use my land for free storage. Unfortunately, yes, unless... He paused. Unless what? Unless you take possession of the structure. It is on your property. Technically, anything built on your land without permission becomes your property. Are you suggesting I lock them out of their own storage unit? I am suggesting that the structure is on your land, built without permission, and therefore could be considered yours. What you do with your property is up to you. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about it. It was risky. Sharon Patterson seemed like the type to escalate rather than back down, but my lawyer was right. The building was on my land, built without permission. By law, it should be mine. That evening, after the moving truck left and Sharon drove away in her white Lexus SUV, I walked out to the storage unit. They had not put a lock on it yet. The roll-up door was closed but not secured. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest-duty padlock they had, along with a hasp and mounting hardware. At 9 p.m., when it was dark and quiet, I installed the hasp on the storage unit door frame and secured it with my new lock. The building and everything in it was now locked up tight, and I had the only key. I expected a reaction quickly. I did not expect it to happen at 6 the next morning. Someone was pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down. I stumbled out of bed and looked through the peephole to see Sharon Patterson, her face red with rage. I opened the door but kept the security chain on. "Can I help you? You locked our storage unit. Remove that lock immediately. That is my property, Mrs. Patterson. The building is on my land, built without my permission. That is HOA property. You have no right. I have every right. I own the land. Your association built on it without permission. That makes the structure mine. This is theft. I am calling the police." "Please do," I said calmly. "I would love to have an official police report documenting that you built a structure on my private property without permission." Her face went through several shades of red and purple. "You have not heard the end of this." She stormed back to her car and screeched out of my driveway. I made coffee and waited. Sure enough, about 40 minutes later, a Henderson Police Department cruiser pulled up. A young officer approached my door looking somewhat bemused. "Mr. Jackson, I am Officer Martinez. I received a call about a property dispute." "Come in, officer. I have all the documentation right here." I showed him everything. The deed, the survey, the plat map, the photos of the construction happening without my permission, and the certified cease and desist letter that had been ignored. Officer Martinez reviewed it all carefully. "So the HOA built this storage unit on your property, without permission, without notification, and they refuse to acknowledge that the land is mine. And you locked it. It is on my property. The structure was built without permission. According to my attorney, anything built on my land without permission becomes my property. The officer nodded slowly. This is definitely a civil matter, Mr. Jackson. I cannot force you to unlock the structure if it is on your property. The HOA will have to resolve this through the courts. Sharon Patterson, who had been waiting in her car, rushed over when she saw the officer coming out. Are you going to arrest him? No, madam. This is a property dispute. You will need to handle it through civil court. But he stole our property. The structure is on his land, madam. If you built it without permission, that is your error. The items inside can be addressed through the courts. I could hear Sharon yelling even after the officer left and was sitting in his cruiser. He gave me a sympathetic look before driving away. Over the next week, I received 3 more certified letters from the HOA's lawyer, a firm called Davidson and Associates. Each letter demanded I remove the lock and return the property inside. Each letter threatened legal action. Robert Chen reviewed them and drafted responses stating that the HOA had built on my property without permission, that I was willing to discuss removal of the structure at their expense, and that any items inside would be held until the HOA acknowledged their error and compensated me for the unauthorized use of my land. The HOA board issued a fine against me, $500 for interfering with HOA operations. I ignored it. They issued another fine, $1,000 for continued violations. I ignored that too. Sharon Patterson began a campaign in the neighborhood Facebook group, painting me as an unreasonable troublemaker who was preventing the HOA from properly maintaining the community. Several neighbors who had never spoken to me before suddenly had opinions about my character. But Gerald Finch, the board member who had actually looked at my documents, posted scans of my property survey and deed to the group. Sharon and the board built on this man's private property. He is not the problem here. That started a civil war in the Facebook group. Some people backed Sharon reflexively because she had been board president forever. Others looked at the evidence and realized the HOA had screwed up badly. A petition started circulating to call a special meeting and remove Sharon from the board. It needed 20% of homeowners to sign. Within a week, it had 30%. The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I had locked the storage unit. The community center was packed. Every chair was filled and people lined the walls. Sharon called the meeting to order, but a homeowner named Patricia Ruiz immediately stood up. This meeting was called to address the board's decision to build on Lucas Jackson's private property. We want answers. This is much ado about nothing, Sharon said dismissively. The HOA has every right to that land. Show us the documentation, someone called out. Sharon fumbled with papers. We have our community plat map, which is 15 years old and incorrect, Gerald Finch said. He stood up and addressed the room. I have reviewed Mr. Jackson's documents. The county agrees with him. The land is his. The board built that storage unit based on outdated information and then refused to acknowledge the mistake. We have spent $12,000 on that storage unit. Sharon's voice was shrill now. Money from the HOA budget. Money you spent building on someone else's property, Patricia said. Did you even verify the property lines before starting construction? The room erupted in arguments. Some people were furious at Sharon for wasting HOA funds. Others were angry at me for locking up the equipment. Most people just seemed confused about how this had happened. Finally, a homeowner named David Kowalski stood up. He was a real estate agent. I pulled the records myself. Mr. Jackson is correct. The property is his. The HOA map is wrong. This is entirely the board's fault. That seemed to settle it for most of the room. A motion was made to remove Sharon Patterson as board president. It passed with 70% of homeowners present voting in favor. Sharon stood up, her face twisted with rage. "You people are making a huge mistake. I have dedicated 15 years to this community, and you wasted $12,000 building on someone else's land," Patricia said. "Please turn over all board documents and accounts to Gerald Finch immediately." Sharon grabbed her purse and stormed out, but not before turning to glare at me. "This is your fault. You are going to regret this." Gerald became interim board president that night. His first act was to approach me after the meeting. "Mr. Jackson, on behalf of the HOA, I apologize. This should never have happened. I appreciate that. We need to figure out how to resolve this. The association needs that equipment, but clearly we built in the wrong location. I am willing to discuss it with your attorney and mine present. But I want acknowledgement that I was right. I want compensation for the use of my land, and I want the structure removed at HOA expense. That is fair. Let me discuss it with the board." 2 days later, Sharon Patterson showed up at my house again. This time she was calmer, but there was something calculating in her eyes. "Mr. Jackson, I want to apologize for my behavior. I was under a lot of stress." I was immediately suspicious. "Okay. I think we can resolve this between us without lawyers getting rich off our dispute." "I am listening. What if the HOA pays you fair market rent for the land the storage unit sits on? We can draw up a lease. You get monthly income, we get to use the storage unit. Everyone wins. And the fact that you built it without permission, we can call it water under the bridge." A simple misunderstanding about property lines. I pretended to think about it. "Let me discuss it with my attorney." Her smile tightened. "Of course." After she left, I called Robert Chen and relayed the conversation. He laughed. "Do not agree to anything with her. Not without a full settlement in writing. She is trying to legitimize their use of your property retroactively. Once you accept rent, you are essentially agreeing they had some right to build there." That is what I thought. The new board president, Gerald Finch, has already contacted me. We have a meeting scheduled for next week. He seems reasonable. That meeting took place at Chen's office with me, Gerald Finch, and 2 other new board members who had replaced Sharon's allies. The HOA's attorney, a tired-looking man named Paul Davidson, was also present. Gerald opened with another apology. "The previous board made a serious error. We want to make this right." Davidson laid out a proposal. "The HOA would pay me $10,000 for the unauthorized use of my land. They would remove the storage unit at their expense within 60 days, and they would publicly acknowledge in writing that the property was mine and they had made a mistake." "What about the equipment inside?" I asked. "We need it back to maintain the community," Gerald said. "We have had to rent equipment for the past month." Chen spoke up. "My client incurred legal fees defending his property rights. The HOA also issued unfair fines against him. We negotiated for another hour. The final settlement was $15,000 to me. Removal of all fines and negative marks on my HOA account. Full written acknowledgement of their error to be posted in the community newsletter and Facebook group. Removal of the structure within 45 days, and return of the equipment inside." I signed the agreement. It felt like a victory, though smaller than I had wanted. Gerald shook my hand. "Thank you for being reasonable about this. Sharon put us in a terrible position." "What happened to her?" "She resigned from the board entirely. Several homeowners are considering suing her personally for mismanagement of HOA funds." Over the next week, I received several apologetic messages from neighbors who had believed Sharon's narrative. The official acknowledgement in the newsletter helped. It was a straightforward admission that the previous board had built on my property based on incorrect records, and that I had been in the right all along. I unlocked the storage unit and allowed the HOA to remove their equipment. It took them 2 trips with a truck to get everything out. But then things got weird. One of the board members, a woman named Tracy Hoffman, called me. "Mr. Jackson, we have a problem. There were several boxes of financial records in that storage unit. They are missing." I did not touch anything inside. I just locked the door. Could someone else have accessed it? Not unless they broke in. I have the only key, Tracy sighed. Sharon Patterson had stored 15 years of HOA financial records in those boxes. We need them for the audit. What audit? Once we took over, we hired an accountant to review the HOA finances. There are some significant discrepancies. Funds that should be in the reserve account are not there. Sharon keeps saying the records will explain everything, but now the records are gone. I thought about Sharon's visit, her sudden desire to negotiate privately. "When did you last see the boxes?" The moving company that loaded the unit made an inventory list. The boxes were definitely there when they locked it up that first day. But I locked it that night. And I have had the only key since then. We stood in silence for a moment, thinking. Then Tracy said, "What if Sharon made a copy of the door before you put your lock on?" The lock was on the door, not a built-in lock. She would have had to remove my lock to get in. Unless she cut through the back wall. We walked out to the now empty storage unit. The front roll door had my lock on it, undisturbed. But when we went around back, we found it. Someone had cut a neat rectangular section out of the metal wall, just big enough for a person to climb through. It had been loosely propped back in place, so it was not obvious unless you looked closely. "She broke into my property," I said, "to steal evidence of her own embezzlement, I bet." Tracy took photos with her phone. "We need to call the police." This time, the police took it much more seriously. Detective Sarah Williams came out that afternoon. She documented the cut wall, took our statements, and reviewed the settlement agreement that showed the building had been on my property. So the HOA stored their property in this unit, which was on Mr. Jackson's land. He locked it legally. And then someone broke in and removed specific boxes of financial records. Sharon Patterson is the only one who would benefit from those records disappearing, Tracy said. "We are conducting an audit and we think she embezzled from the HOA. How much money are we talking about?" "We do not know yet, but the reserve fund should have close to $200,000. It has $70,000. Detective Williams nodded slowly. "I will need copies of your financial documents and any evidence of embezzlement. Breaking and entering is one thing. If there is significant theft involved, this becomes much more serious." The investigation moved quickly after that. The HOA's accountant found evidence that Sharon had been writing checks to a company called Patterson Property Services for years. That company was owned by her husband. They had been billing the HOA for services that were never performed, to the tune of about $10,000 a month for the past 5 years. $600,000. Gone. Detective Williams got a warrant for Sharon's home and vehicles. They found the missing boxes of records in her garage, along with her computer that had all her financial files. She had not even tried to delete them. Sharon Patterson was arrested on charges of embezzlement, theft, fraud, and breaking and entering. Her husband was charged as an accomplice. The local news picked up the story because the amounts were so large. I gave one interview, keeping it brief. "The HOA built a storage unit on my property without permission. When I locked it up, it led to the board president being removed, which led to an audit, which uncovered years of theft." Sometimes standing up for yourself has unexpected consequences. The news reporter, An energetic woman named Michelle Torres loved that quote. It made the evening broadcast. Over the following months, things slowly returned to normal in Meadowbrook. The HOA hired a professional management company to handle finances and operations. Gerald Finch remained as board president, but with much stronger oversight. The Pattersons tried to make a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested. The trial was scheduled for 8 months after the arrest. I was listed as a witness, though my part was minor. I just had to testify about the construction on my land and my decision to lock the unit. The storage unit structure itself sat empty on my property for 2 months before a demolition crew came and removed it. They hauled away the metal walls, dug up the concrete foundation, and filled in the hole. They even reseeded the area with grass. By summer, you could not tell anything had ever been there. The Pattersons were found guilty on all counts. Sharon got 8 years in prison. Her husband got 5. They were ordered to repay the full amount plus damages, though the HOA's lawyer said actually collecting that money would take years if it happened at all. The HOA insurance covered most of the loss, which was good because otherwise every homeowner would have faced a massive special assessment. One evening, about a year after all of this started, Gerald Finch stopped by my house with a bottle of wine. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. "If you had not stood your ground, we would never have discovered what Sharon was doing. She would probably still be stealing from us. I just did not want someone building on my land. And you were right, but a lot of people would have backed down when the HOA pushed back. You did not." We sat on my back porch and talked for a while. He told me about the changes in the HOA, the new management company, the improved oversight of finances. "We also updated all our property maps," he said. "Had a professional surveyor come out and verify every property line in the community. Turns out yours was not the only one that was wrong in our records. Seriously, 3 other properties had similar issues, though thankfully we had not built anything on their land. We sent out letters apologizing and correcting our records. That is good." Sharon ran this HOA like her personal kingdom for 15 years. No oversight, no checks and balances. She approved her own expenditures, wrote her own checks. It was a disaster waiting to happen. After Gerald left, I stood in my backyard where the storage unit had been. The grass had grown in nicely. You really could not tell anything had happened here. I thought about how a simple property dispute had unraveled years of fraud. How my refusal to back down, even when it seemed petty to lock up someone's lawn equipment, had led to justice for hundreds of homeowners who had been systematically robbed. Sometimes being stubborn pays off. The following spring, I got a notice about the HOA annual meeting. I almost threw it away but decided to attend. The meeting was nothing like the chaotic gatherings from the year before. It was organized, professional, and boring in the best possible way. The new treasurer presented the financial report. The reserve fund was healthy. All expenses were documented and approved by the board with proper votes. They had recovered about half the stolen money from insurance and were working on getting more from the Pattersons' seized assets. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me. Some had been skeptical of me at first, believing Sharon's narrative that I was just a troublemaker. But once the truth came out, they realized I had been the victim, not the villain. "You saved us a lot of money," one neighbor said. "If Sharon had kept going, she would have drained every account we had." "I just did not want a building on my property," I said for what felt like the 100th time, but I understood what he meant. Sometimes doing the right thing for your own reasons ends up helping a lot of other people too. A few months later, I received a check in the mail from the HOA. $15,000, as agreed in the settlement. It had taken longer than expected because of the criminal investigation and insurance claims, but they finally paid it. I used some of it to take a vacation to Colorado, hiking in the Rockies and generally enjoying not dealing with HOA drama. The rest went into savings. When I got back, there was a message on my phone from Michelle Torres, the news reporter. "Mr. Jackson, we are doing a follow-up story on the Patterson case now that they have been sentenced. Would you be willing to give us an interview?" I called her back and agreed. This time the interview was longer, more reflective. Looking back, "Do you regret how you handled things?" she asked. "No. I mean, it would have been nice if the HOA had just listened when I showed them my property documents. But I am glad I did not back down. Not just because it exposed the embezzlement, but because it was the right thing to do. That was my land. They had no right to build there. Some people said you were being petty by locking up lawn equipment. Some people build things on other people's land without permission and think that is okay. I do not think standing up for your property rights is petty. The HOA paid you $15,000 in the settlement. Some people said you profited from this. The HOA paid me compensation for using my land without permission and for the legal fees I incurred defending my property. That is not profit. That is making things right." The interview aired during the evening news, part of a longer segment about HOA reform and the dangers of inadequate oversight. They used my case as an example of how one homeowner's vigilance can uncover much larger problems. After that, things finally settled down. The Meadowbrook community became just another neighborhood again. The HOA functioned properly, maintained the common areas, and stayed out of people's business. Gerald eventually stepped down as president, and a retired accountant took over. The board meetings were sparsely attended because nothing controversial ever happened anymore. I kept living in my house, enjoying my corner lot with its extra land. The area where the storage unit had been became my favorite spot for a lawn chair and a book on summer evenings. Sometimes I would see new residents moving into the neighborhood, young couples excited about their first homes. I wondered if any of them knew about the storage unit drama, the embezzlement, the arrests. Probably not. It was just neighborhood history now, fading into obscurity. One afternoon, about 2 years after everything started, I was mowing my lawn when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, looking professional in a business suit. "Mr. Jackson, I am attorney Rebecca Foster. I represent the Meadowbrook HOA." My heart sank. "What now?" "Do not worry," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "Nothing bad. The HOA board wanted me to deliver this to you personally." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter on official HOA letterhead. "Dear Mr. Jackson, on behalf of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, we want to thank you for your unwavering commitment to property rights and personal integrity. Your actions 2 years ago, while initially controversial, led to the discovery of systematic fraud that had been damaging our community for years. Because of you, we were able to recover significant funds and implement proper oversight procedures. The community is stronger because you stood your ground. As a token of our appreciation, the HOA board has voted unanimously to waive all your HOA dues for the next 5 years. Thank you for being the kind of neighbor who cares enough to fight for what is right. Sincerely, the Meadowbrook HOA Board of Directors." I read it twice, then looked at Attorney Foster. "They are waiving my dues for 5 years. It is about $6,000 in total. The board felt it was appropriate given everything you went through." After she left, I sat on my front steps and laughed. I had bought this house to have a peaceful place to live. Instead, I got a year of intense drama, police investigations, and news interviews. But in the end, justice was served, thieves were punished and I got my property rights respected. And free HOA dues for 5 years. Not bad. That evening, I called my parents in Ohio to tell them the latest development. My dad, who had been following the whole saga, laughed hard at the news about the waived dues. "So let me get this straight," he said. "The HOA built on your land, you locked them out, it uncovered massive fraud. 2 people went to prison, and now you are getting free HOA dues for 5 years. That about sums it up. Son, you should write a book about this. I think I will just enjoy the peace and quiet now." But my dad was right that it was a hell of a story. Sometimes standing up for yourself has consequences you never could have predicted. Sometimes those consequences are exactly what needed to happen. The next few years passed quietly. I dated a teacher named Melissa Rivera for a while, though that relationship eventually ran its course. We stayed friendly. I got promoted at my job doing IT work for a local hospital system. Life was good. Gerald Finch and I became actual friends, grabbing beers occasionally and talking about everything except the HOA. He retired from the board after 3 years, satisfied that the community was in good hands. "You know what I learned from all this?" he said one evening at a local bar. "Power without oversight corrupts almost everyone eventually. Sharon probably started with good intentions. But 15 years of no one questioning her, no one checking her work, and she convinced herself she deserved that money. You think she regrets it? Probably regrets getting caught. People like that rarely regret what they did, just that they faced consequences." I thought about that. Sharon Patterson had seemed so confident, so certain of her authority. Even when I showed her legal documents proving the land was mine, she could not accept being wrong. That kind of arrogance probably made it easy to rationalize stealing from her neighbors. "The crazy thing is," Gerald continued, "if she had just admitted the mistake about your property line, none of this would have been discovered. She could have kept stealing for years." So in a weird way, her stubbornness brought her down. Exactly. If she had been reasonable, checked your documents and said, "Oops, our mistake, we will move the storage unit," she would still be HOA president and still be stealing. We clinked our beer bottles together. To stubborn people bringing themselves down. Time passed. The 5 years of waived HOA dues came and went. When I started paying again, it felt strange to write that check, but the HOA was well run now and the money was being used properly. I got another job offer, this one in Boulder, Colorado. I thought about taking it, but I had grown attached to my house, my neighborhood, and Henderson in general. The job would have been a promotion, but I was comfortable where I was. Besides, I had put so much effort into defending this property. It felt wrong to just leave it. Sharon Patterson was released from prison after serving 6 years. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to Arizona to live with her daughter. Her husband was already out and working as a handyman, trying to rebuild his life. Part of me wondered if she ever drove past the old neighborhood, looked at the community she used to run like a fiefdom, and felt anything. Regret, anger, embarrassment, I would never know. The storage unit incident became part of Meadowbrook lore. New residents would sometimes hear the story from longtime neighbors, usually in the context of "this is why we have such strict financial oversight now." I became known as that guy who caught the HOA president stealing, even though I always pointed out I did not catch anything. I just did not want a building on my property. Everything else was dominoes falling. 5 years after the initial incident, the local community college asked me to speak to a property law class about my experience. I agreed, figuring it might be useful for students to hear a real-world example. The class was small, maybe 20 students. I walked them through everything, from discovering the construction crew on my property to the final settlement and eventual arrest. The main lesson, I told them, is to document everything. I took photos, I kept every letter, I had my property survey and deed organized and accessible. When it came time to prove my case, I had evidence for everything. A student raised her hand. But what if the HOA had been right? What if their property records had been correct? Then I would have been wrong and I would have had to accept that. But I knew I was right. I had purchased that land, I had the survey done professionally, and I had all the county paperwork, so I was willing to stand my ground. Another student asked, "Were you scared when they kept threatening you?" Not really. I had a good lawyer, and I knew the law was on my side. What frustrated me was how long it took for them to admit the truth. They kept acting like their old map was somehow more valid than current legal documents. The professor, a woman in her 60s who had practiced real estate law for decades, nodded. That is unfortunately common. HOA organizations, even governments, sometimes cling to their records even when presented with contradictory evidence. Pride and institutional inertia can be powerful forces. After the class, several students came up to ask more questions. One young man was dealing with his own HOA issue about a fence. I gave him my attorney's contact information. The key is to know your rights and stand up for them, I told him. But also document everything. You need evidence. Driving home from that class, I reflected on how much my life had changed because of a construction crew pouring concrete on my land. I had been dragged into a conflict I never wanted, but in standing up for myself, I had helped expose corruption that was hurting hundreds of people. It is strange how life works sometimes. Now, a decade after everything happened, I still live in the same house on Pinewood Drive. The corner lot with the extra land that caused so much trouble is my favorite feature. I built a nice patio where the storage unit used to be, with a fire pit and comfortable chairs. The Meadowbrook HOA is still well run. The management company they hired years ago does a good job. Dues are reasonable, the common areas look great, and there is no drama. Sometimes I sit on that patio in the evening, looking at the space where a building once stood without permission, and I think about the chain of events that followed. 2 people went to prison. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were recovered. An entire community learned the importance of oversight and accountability, all because I refused to let someone build on my land. Would I do it all again, knowing what I know now? Absolutely. It was stressful and time-consuming and frustrating, but it was the right thing to do. My property rights mattered. The law mattered. And sometimes standing up for what is right, even in a seemingly small dispute, can have effects that ripple far beyond what you imagine. The grass grew back perfectly where the storage unit had been. Sometimes I can barely remember exactly where it sat. Nature has a way of healing over human mistakes, but I remember. I remember the sound of concrete being poured on my land without permission. I remember Sharon Patterson's smug smile when she dismissed my legal documents. I remember the moment I snapped that padlock shut and took control of the situation. And I remember learning that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to back down when you know you are right. That is a lesson worth far more than $15,000 or 5 years of waived HOA dues. It is a lesson about standing up for yourself, trusting in the law, and not being intimidated by people who abuse their authority. The storage unit is long gone. But the principle remains, solid as the concrete foundation they once poured on my property without permission. This is my land. I stood up for it, and I would do it again.